Chapter 5. Rock Bannon stopped that night in a lined cabin 6 miles west of Poplar and across the valley. When morning came, he was just saddling up when Bat Chavez rode in. With him were Johnny Stark and Lou Murray. All three were armed. Bat grinned at him. Then his eyes fell on the skinned knuckles, and he chuckled. "Looks like you had some action." "A little," Rock said, and then explained briefly. "You watch yourselves," he said, "and stick together. That outfit's out for trouble," said Rock. "All I want's a shot at Zapata," Bat said harshly. "I'll kill me a breed if I get it." Rock mounted and rode north towards the ranch house. No act of his could avert trouble now. He had hoped to convince the settlers who came with the wagon train that they should break away from Mort Harper. That would draw the lines plainly. The ranch against the land grabbers. He knew that Mulholland was an honest, if a stupid man. The others of the train were honest, but some of them, like Purcell and Lamport, were firm adherents to Harper and believed in him. This belief they combined with a dislike of Rock Bannon. It had been a hard task to persuade Hardy Bishop to let them stay. The old man was a fire-eater, and he knew what it would mean to let settlers get a toehold in his rich valley. Once in, they would encroach more and more on his best range, until he was crowded back to nothing. Only his affection for Rock had convinced him, and the fact that he had gleaned from Rock's talk among the settlers was a girl. It's always a girl. Rock Bannon knew what the old man was thinking. Lonely, hard-bitten, and tough, Bishop was as affectionate as many big bear-like men are. His heart was as big and warm as himself. And from the day he had taken Rock Bannon in, when the boy was orphaned at 6, when Kaw Indians had killed his parents, Bishop had lived as much for Rock as for his ranch. Now, more than anything, he wanted Rock settled, married, and living on the broad acres of Bishop's Valley. It had been that as much as anything that brought him around to Rock's way of thinking when Rock planned to go east to Council Bluffs. Secretly, he hoped the boy would come back with a wife, and certainly there were no women around Bishop's Valley but an occasional squaw. He had never seen this girl with a wagon train, but he had gleaned more than a little from Rock's casual comments, and what he'd heard pleased him. Hardy Bishop was a big man, weighing, now that he was heavy around the middle, nearly 300 pounds. Yet in the days of his raw youth, he tipped the beam at no less than 250 pounds. On his hip, even the big dragoon colts looked insignificant, but he was scarcely less fast than Rock. Seated deep in a cowhide-covered chair, he looked up when Rock came in and grinned. He was just filling his pipe. There was a skinned place on Bannon's cheekbone, and his knuckles were raw. "Trouble you've had," Bishop said, his deep voice filling the room. "Been over to look at them settlers again. Think they killed Wes?" "Not the settlers," Rock said. "One of the men with them." Rock sat down on the butt of a log and quietly outlined the whole situation. Explained about Harper, Zapata, and the teamster. "They had that stuff cached in the hills," Rock went on. "Red Lunny spotted it some time back. There were about a dozen men holed up back there with a lot of supplies, too many for themselves. He kept an eye on them, but they didn't wander around and made no trouble, so he left them alone. Evidently, Mort Harper had them planted there. The wagon train, as near as I can figure, he planned to use as a blind in case the government got into this. He could always say they were honest settlers looking for homes, and the government would be inclined to favor them. What he really wants is Bishop's Valley." He'll have a time getting it, Bishop said grimly. I'll bank on that. I fit Indians all over these hills, but this valley I bought fair and square from old Warcloud. We never had no Indian trouble until lately, when the wagon trains started coming through. Those Mormons, they had the right idea. Treat Indians good, pay for what you get, and no shooting Indians for the fun of it, like some folks do. Why, Rock, I trapped all over these mountains. Lived with Indians, trapped with them, hunted with them, slept in their teepees. I never had trouble with them. I was through this country with Wilbur Price Hunt's Astorians. When I was no more than 16. But a man growed. I was with John Day in this country after that, and he saw more of it than any other man. Took me 2 years to drive these cattle in here. First ever seen in this country. I drove them up from Santa Fe in 6 or 7 of the roughest drives any man ever saw, with Indians doing most of my driving for me. They said I was crazy then, but now my cattle run these hills and they eat this valley grass until their sides are fit to bust. Most of these days you'll start driving these cattle east. Mark my words, there'll come a day they'll make you rich. And then some whippersnapper like this Harper, why, he rubbed his jaw irritably and looked up at Rock. You see that girl, that Crockett girl? Uh-huh, Rock admitted. I did. Why not stop this here cayusing around and bring her home, son? Time you took a wife. Ain't no sense in a man running loose too long. I did, and then had my wife very long before she died. A fine girl, too. Hardy, Rock said suddenly, calling him by his first name, as he had since Bishop first took him in hand as a child. I don't want war with those people. They're asking for it, and that Mulholland is simple enough to be led by the nose by Harper. Why don't you let me go get Zapata? I'll take him on myself, in fact, he added grimly. I'd like to. Then we can take some of the boys, get Harper and his teamsters, and start them out of here. Separate the sheeps from the goats, eh? Bishop looked at him quizzically. All right, son. I've gone along with you this long. You take the boys, you get that Harper out of there, and start him back to Laramie. As for Zapata, do what you like. I've seen some men with guns, and you're the fastest thing I ever did see, and the best shot. But don't leave 'em alive. If I had my way, we'd string every one of 'em up to a poplar tree and right quick. The old man grinned briefly at Bannon, leaned back, and lighted his pipe. So far as he was concerned, the subject was closed. Bat Chavez was a man who made his own plans and went his own way. Loyal to the greatest degree, he obeyed Rock Bannon or Hardy Bishop without question. They were his bosses, and he liked and respected them both. However, he had another loyalty, and that was to the memory of Wes Freeman. He and Wes had ridden together, hunted together, fought Indians together. Wes was younger, and Bat Chavez was always considered himself the other's sponsor as well as friend. Now Wes was dead, and to Bat Chavez that opened a feud that could be settled only by blood. Johnny Stark, Lou Murray were like-minded. Both were young, hardy, and accustomed to live by the gun. They understood men like Zapata. Of the three, perhaps the only one who rated anything like an even break with the half-breed was the half-Mexican, half-Irish Chavez. However, no one of them would have hesitated to draw on sight. They weren't looking for trouble, but they were ready. In that frame of mind, they started down the valley to move some of the cattle away from the mouth of the Poplar Canyon. No one of them knew what he was riding into, and had they known, no one of them would have turned back. Mort Harper, in his living quarters in the back of the saloon, was disturbed. Things had not gone as he'd planned. Secure in his familiarity with men of Hardy Bishop's type, he had been positive that the arrival of the wagon train and the beginning of their settlement would precipitate trouble. He had counted on a sudden attack by Bishop and perhaps the killing of one or more of the settlers. Nothing more, he knew, would have been required to unite them against the common enemy. Peace-loving they might be, but they were men of courage and men who believed in independence and equal rights for all, typically American. They wouldn't take any pushing around. On his knowledge of their character and that of Bishop, he had built his plans. Over a year before, he had seen Bishop's Valley, and the sight had aroused a lust for possession that he had never known could live within him. Since that day, he had lived for but one thing: to possess Bishop's Valley, regardless of the cost. It was beyond the reach of the law. Few people in the country had any idea the valley existed or that it had been settled. His first thought was to ride in with a strong band of outlaws recruited from the border towns and take the place by main force. But times, he knew, were changing. Morton Harper was shrewd enough to understand that the fight might arouse government inquiry. Fremont and Carson knew this country, and it was possible the army might soon move into it. It would behoove him to have justice on his side. The wagon trains offered that chance. From the first, he had seen what a good chance it was. At the fort, he watched them go through, and he saw the weariness of women and children, the haggard lines of men's faces. The novelty of the trip was over, and the miles upon miles remained before they could reach Oregon. If he could get some of them into the valley country, he believed he could persuade them by some method to stay on. With that end in view, he watched until he saw the wagon train he wanted. Those which were led by able and positive men he had avoided. When he encountered Cap Mulholland, he was quick to perceive his opportunity. In his visit to the camp, he noted that Tom Crockett was a mild, tolerant man, friendly and interested mainly in finding a new home and getting a plow into the ground. Pagones was a strong, able man, but not outspoken or likely to push himself into a position of leadership. Pike Purcell and Lamport were honest, able men, but ignorant and alike in their dislike of Rock Bannon. Lamport was unmarried and thoroughly undesirable, had fancied himself for an inside track with Sharon Crockett until Bannon joined the train. Rock Bannon was constantly with her, first as a wounded man needing care and later as a writer. Lamport grew jealous. Purcell, married to a nagging wife, had looked after Sharon with desire. His own dislike of Bannon stemmed from the same source, but grew even more bitter because Pike sensed Bannon was the better man, and Pike hated him for it. Mort Harper was quick to curry the favor of these two. He talked with them, flattered them subtly, and bought them drinks. He learned that Purcell was desperately hard up and lent him some money. He gave Lamport a gun he admired. The only flaw in the picture had been Rock Bannon, and in Rock, Harper was quick to recognize a formidable and dangerous antagonist. He also realized he had an excellent weapon in the veiled enmity of Purcell and Lamport. His plans had gone ahead very well until the attack by Bishop failed to materialize. Despite himself, he was disturbed. Would the old man really let them settle there? He caused a few cattle to be killed for meat and left evidence about that Rock Bannon had found the remains of the slaughtered cattle and buried them. He could not know. The expected attack failed, and he sensed the falling away from him on the part of the settlers. The only way he could hope to get the valley was by precipitating open warfare, killing off the Bishop forces and taking possession. Then in due time he would eliminate the settlers themselves and reign supreme, possessor of one of the largest cattle empires in the country. Pete Zapata was under no orders to kill, but the fact that he had killed Wes Freeman fell in line with Harper's plans. Yet he could sense the disaffection among the settlers. Crockett and Pagones could be a strong force against him if they became stubborn. Something was needed to align them firmly on his side. The chance came as he had hoped it would. With Pete Zapata, High Miller, Pike Purcell, Lamport, and Collins, he was riding down in the valley when they saw Bat Chavez and the two Bishop riders approaching. Had Harper led his party along the trail where they had started, the paths of the two groups would not have intersected, but Harper reined in and waited. Chavez wasn't the man to ride around trouble. In Lou Murray and Johnny Stark, he had two companions who had never ridden around anything that even resembled trouble. With guns loosened in holsters, they rode steadily on. "Howdy," Bat Chavez said. His eyes swung and fastened on Pete Zapata. "Where are you riding?" "Who's asking?" Purcell demanded truculently. "We go where we want." "Not on this range you don't. You stick to your valley. This here's Bishop's range." "He own everything?" Miller demanded. "We ride where we please." "Looks like you've been riding where somebody else pleased," Johnny Stark said, grinning. "In fact, that face looks like somebody rid all over you with spikes in his boots." Miller's face flamed. "There was 3 of 'em," he snapped. "You couldn't do it. I think it's time we taught you Bishop riders a lesson anyway." "You mean," Chavez demanded sullenly, "like that murdering breed that shot Wes Freeman in the back?" Zapata's hand flashed for his gun, and Chavez was scarcely slower. Only the jerk of Zapata's horse head saved him. As it was, the horse took the bullet right through the head and leaped straight up into the air, jerking Zapata's gun and spoiling his aim. There was a sudden flurry of gunshots, and Mort Harper was quick to sense his chance. He drew a 6-shooter and calmly shot Collins through the back. The attack broke as quickly as it began. Zapata's horse had leaped, then hit the ground, stone dead. Thrown from the horse, Zapata lost his gun and sprawled in the grass. Showed no desire to get up and join the fight or even hunt for his gun. Outnumbered, and with Murray shot through the leg, the Bishop riders drew off. Purcell had been burned along the cheek and Miller's horse was killed, so the battle ended after only a few seconds. With 2 horses and 1 man dead, So the battle ended after only a few seconds with 2 horses dead, and with 2 horses and 1 man dead. In the excitement, only Mort Harper saw the flare of pained astonishment and accusation in Collins' eyes. The blacksmith's mouth refused to shape words, and he died there in the grass. Harper looked down at him, a faint smile on his face. Collins had been a popular man, quiet and well-liked. This would do what all Harper's other plans had failed to do. "Collins got it." Pike stood over him, his face hard and saddened. "He was a good man." Of them all, Collins was the only man of the wagon train Pike Purcell had known before the trip began. They had come through the war together. Might as well bury him, I guess," Mort said. Pike looked up. "No, we'll tote him back home. His widow'll want to see him. Reckon it'll go hard with her." Mort Harper's lips thinned, but there was nothing he could say without arousing suspicion. Silently, the little cavalcade started back. Collins' body was tied to Pike's horse, and he walked alongside, trailed by Zapata and Miller. Okay. That's as far as we're going to go there. We'll finish the rest of it tomorrow. Love you. God bless.